We recently asked a couple hundred of you emerging biotech leaders about your go-to sources of information when you face tough professional challenges. Your top response wasn't webinars, it wasn't scientific journals, it wasn't trade shows, it wasn't even consultants. Far and away, you said you most often turn to your peers for trusted insight. Enabling a community of peers is what the Business of Biotech podcast is all about. It's also what our new Business of Biotech newsletter is all about. Peer-driven content, no strings attached, delivered to your inbox once a month. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to subscribe. The Business of Biotech is produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community, with support from Cytiva. Cytiva also demonstrates its commitment to the leaders of new and emerging biopharma at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. So we're about 10 months post-approval of the Inflation Reduction Act, and while the sky hasn't fallen, the biotech capital markets and innovation scenes are in a seemingly protracted slump compared to the years-long rally we'd been enjoying, and the IRA's imminence is concerning many in our space. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and on today's show, we're getting a grip on the Inflation Reduction Act with none other than the phenom of biopharma finance himself, Allan Shaw. Allan, welcome back. I've missed you.
Great to be back. I missed you guys as well. And as always, I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So we've been talking about having a conversation. I think what we've been talking about is having a few conversations about the Inflation Reduction Act, because there's so much to cover here. But we figured we'd get started today with a conversation around what it is, what it intends to do, and perhaps what some of the unintended consequences might be. So let's start there, Allan. For those who haven't been following along, what is the Inflation Reduction Act set to do? Give us a level set on what the act is and why it came to pass.
You know, it means different things to different people, I would say, and it's certainly been characterized as such. You know, I would say it was generally speaking, it was advertised as a historic down payment on deficit reduction to fight inflation, direct investment for domestic energy production and manufacturing, with the aim to significantly reduce carbon emissions. It was also advertised to actually increase IRS resources to go after all those tax deadbeats and improve the tax collection process as well. Additionally,
so what you're saying, I'll interrupt you real quick, because what you're saying, already in this short response, is already indicative to me of just a fat bill that has this tidy little name. You know, we recognize that the economy is in some peril. Inflation was running rampant. We saw it coming for some time. So let's put together a tidy little inflation reduction package that you've just hit on, I don't know, half a dozen issues, seemingly, I guess, that we could tie to inflation. Carbon emissions, really? It seems like there's a lot going on there already, Allan. And I cut you short.
Yes, and then really where they kind of served it all up on a platter. You know, clearly, as you touched on, there were special interest groups and pandering that obviously went into it, but it was done in the spirit with the aim of being able to lower healthcare costs. And it's interesting because, you know, the United States actually has the highest cost per capita, but we also have the lowest life expectancy. So we actually do pay more for less, ironically, with that. So one of the things that they were trying to do in respect to lowering healthcare, and this is really a first-time event, is they're allowing Medicare to negotiate directly for prescription prices over in the forthcoming years, starting in 2025. And regrettably, you know, this focus on lowering costs really overlooked what's really wrong with the healthcare system. You know, it's really continuing the old paradigm of focusing on cost and profit, as opposed to being really focused on patient outcomes and value to the healthcare system. and it really ignored the fundamental fact that there's a lack of accountability and coordination with healthcare spend, which I can certainly go on forever for, and perhaps we could say that for alcohol. But we, as we have time, we can certainly talk to it.
Well, it's curious to me, like I guess the separation from patient outcomes, which, for many years now, there have been advocacy groups working toward outcomes-based medicine, right? Like it's been a buzzword. It's been something that we've seen fits and starts of momentum on for years now. Why? Like, I guess, give me some more color on how the Inflation Reduction Act kind of moves us away from the momentum that we'd been building around outcomes-based medicine for seemingly for so long.
Well, it doesn't necessarily undermine that, but I think, in terms of what it didn't really focus on patient outcomes. And I'll speak to it a little bit more on how it's really impacted the biopharma industry in terms of the way it's kind of tamping down on innovation. And the Inflation Reduction Act of 22, which, as you know, I tongue-in-cheek refer to it as the Innovation Reduction Act, is poised to be a landmark event for the U.S. healthcare system, as we talked about. It materially degrades the investment case for certain therapeutics for unmet medical needs. And it's really, it's incredible, but it's the first time in the U.S. that a patent-defined period of market-based exclusivity has been undermined and curtailed with government price setting for R&D intensive sectors. There's rate of returns. There's math behind the risk that's calculated behind this. And it really fails to appreciate it, or put another way, it really takes it all for granted. Like people are just doing this in their spare time, and the benevolence of it all. It really is driven by the capitalistic nature of our system, and our ecosystem is second to none. And as a consequence of this, there's this clearly jeopardizes to your point, the progress that biotech has been making in terms of innovation. And also given the fact that it's kind of putting you right into the jaws of Medicare for price negotiation. It's also going to have an implication, arguably, on the availability of drugs that will be developed for senior citizens. When there's alternatives in terms of drug development where you have a little less pricing headwinds. So this is all a complication. And in order to do this, the mechanism is really letting Medicare negotiate directly with the manufacturer. So it is pushing us more to a single pay system that has arguably worked elsewhere in the world. But again, what are you measuring against? If you're looking for innovative medicines, it's difficult. And what it's also done, I think, to really go on further, is when it sets the bar for being pushed into Medicare negotiations, it actually calls out a fundamental distinction for small molecules. And that in itself is going to have fierce implications.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned the cost paradigm, right? Like the intent to reduce healthcare costs. And I read some commentary from the Incubate Coalition not too long ago that says of the act that it might drive down costs for the government, but not necessarily for patients. And that seems like it's a 180 from the intent, right? It seems to fly in the face of the intent here. So can you break that down, like how that could possibly be?
So there's a few things that drives that. And I think the answer is it kind of depends. In a nutshell, some conditions and people will be experiencing lower costs, but many will also potentially result in higher costs or restricted access if rebates are misplaced by price setting. For instance, the IRA will let seniors pay more for proper insurance, And this effectively transfers seniors paying more for senior patients in society as opposed to society paying for senior patients. So I think insurance premiums will go up. They do highlight the fact that the out-of-pocket costs for senior citizens, once this goes into effect, will be limited at $2,000. So there's some different contracting views. It's also worth pointing out, too, that, if you don't have medicines that come to market, it's also going to cost patients more money because the system will cost more money. One of the major, besides the resource implications on small molecules and large biologics, the other, I think, major headwind for patients in society is the fact that the timing for market exclusivity goes off on the very first product approval. So it really eliminates the incentives and to be able to do label expansions and move into other indications, like Dupixent. Dupixent is helping a wide range of people. Whether it's for skin or asthma, they just recently got another indication approved. There's no incentive to do that because you're not going to get the return on investment because the clock starts ticking. So I think they also mean that because of your foregoing therapies that could actually be much more cost effective because we're focused on the wrong things, you're going to ultimately cost patients more money than less.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You just hinted at this too. It's also been said that the IRA encourages pharma companies to stop looking for new applications of existing drugs for post-approval research for secondary indications. And that's interesting to me, especially in the context of I recently met a guy named David Feigenbaum who runs an organization called everycure.org, and he's a doctor. He wrote a book called Chasing My Cure, and he's a doctor who had a serious disease that he himself found an off-label use of an existing approved drug to effectively cure himself. It's an inspiring story, and from what I'm picking up here, that more opportunities to repurpose existing drugs like that, which David Feigenbaum is working so hard to enable, is in peril here. Can you comment on that? Like why this act would have negative implications on the opportunities to repurpose find new applications for existing drugs?
Yes, it kind of speaks to the fact that once the product is approved, the clock or measurement. So if it's a large molecule, it's 13 years. For a small molecule, it'll be 9 years. Mm-hmm. So that's the time where you have pricing control and have market exclusivity. After that time, you basically are subject to negotiating with CMS. And while it's yet to be seen, I don't know if the negotiation is really a negotiation. I think it's kind of a take it or leave it proposition. So, if you're going to expand into different indications, you're running different trials, right? That's an investment that's being made, and there's an expected return for that investment. And if you're going to be shortening the runway, you're going to impact the ability to generate a return. And that's what, and so that's a fundamental issue. And this rule change, which seems rather arbitrary between small and large molecules, I don't quite get it, but it really undermines all the incentive that Hatch-Waxman provided for R&D investment. And this was a kind of an industrial contract with society. And this really upended it and really, again, focused on the wrong things. So, what people fail to appreciate is that, it's usually the last 5 years or so of your exclusivity period that represents about 50% of the profits that you generate. So once you cut that tail off, there's no real incentive to invest and extend these drugs in terms of other indications. And it also, because of this, it effectively pushes the more cost-effective small molecules, which are less costly to manufacture. They're, there's an argument, but people perceive them to be easier for patient administration. And it actually puts, ironically, an emphasis on higher cost therapeutics, which are the large molecules. Manufacture antibodies are a lot more expensive, and there's more logistical concerns. They need to be refrigerated. And some patients don't even want needles. So, then you got a whole administration issue. So, so bottom line, this is it's hard to see how it really drives down costs when you're looking at it as a system, and it's really ultimately going to hurt patients and the ability to bring new and innovative treatments to the market.
Yeah. Yeah. So the law was passed in August, but a lot of the, I guess, mechanisms have yet to, the machine has yet to fire up in a lot of cases. So in I guess in anticipation, post passing of the law, but in anticipation of some of its effects, what are you seeing out there in terms of reaction and implications already? Like, what are what are the companies that you work with and for, and your peers kind of bracing for, or what are they feeling already?
No, it's amazing at the chain reaction. With the stroke of the pen, the consequences were actually rather profound, resulting in dozens of companies announcing changes in their resource allocation priorities concerning pipeline activities.
Yeah.
And it touches on the reasons we talked about. A lot of I'd say the original knee-jerk reaction that I've seen has really touched on small molecule. You saw folks like Alnylam and Novo Nordisk and AstraZeneca and Merck and BMS, among others, was really part of that parade, announcing that they were abandoning programs. Some were as late as phase 3, and they didn't want to expend the cost of a phase 3 study, realizing that they were going to be limited in terms of the lifespan of these drugs. And also a lot of the orphan drugs, for instance, depend on multiple indications. And again, that's a rate limiting factor for bringing these new drugs to so really, I'd say in a nutshell, it was an impact on resource allocation, and we will see it more down the road in terms of label expansions and other indications. And when you think about it, before this law change, generally speaking, on average, these drugs enjoyed about a 14-year period of exclusivity. So taking it down to 9 is really a significant reduction. It's like 43% of their relative period of exclusivity. And when you look at that from a cash flow perspective, it changes the math considerably. So, when you're making a decision, which end am I going to invest in, and you're going to be more inclined to go with the one that has the longer life. Mm-hmm. And that's wrong, and again, this is done by people who don't really have an understanding. I think we as an industry, somebody dropped the ball on the trade side, whether it was on the pharma side, there was actually leadership changes, the bio organization shortly thereafter. So you can read the tea leaves as they be. So this has been rather profound.
For emerging biotechs, scaling the process development and manufacturing of biologic molecules to clinical standards can be challenging. However, you don't need to go it alone. Don't miss an episode of the Business of Biotech podcast, where we offer insights on regulatory, funding, and other essential topics. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech.
On the other hand, I think, in the spirit of objectivity, I think it's important to call out that when Pfizer recently did an acquisition and acquired Seattle Genetics, and they actually attributed the IRA to some of the industrial logic associated with the transaction. They as opposed to some people who have indicated that this is going to have an impact on on drugs for senior citizens, the team over at Pfizer kind of took the sailing approach and steered into the wind. And they kind of took the view that given the fact that the out-of-pocket costs are going to be capped at $2,000 a year, they saw this as an opportunity to actually expand the market with senior citizens and embrace the change. And further to that fact, the Seattle Genetics focus were really an antibody conjugate platform. So those were large molecules by definition. So it gave them an advantage of again, allocating resources for products that will have a longer shelf life. Yeah. So that's the other, I think, aspect that I've observed in the short term that this law has been on the books.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the industry associations as a side question, kind of follow up to that. Like you've seen over the course of your career, I'm sure you've seen successful advocacy on the part of industry organizations and lobbying efforts, and in cases like this, perhaps missing the pitch, right? Like unsuccessful responses. What does an industry organization do to sort of save face, or I don't know, try to regain some traction in light of a mess like this, sort of a lack of representation on the part of its constituents? Is there anything that the industry organizations can do or should be doing, in your opinion? I know it's off the cuff question. I'm just curious.
No, I think we need a new PR person.
Yeah.
I think we're generally villainized, right? And when you think about the profound impact that the biopharma products have had on society, we should be heralded as opposed to criticized. When you think about all the money that goes into defense spending and foreign aid versus what's spent in research and development and the impact on society, the money's much better spent over here. So, we need to be able to understand and show people the cause and effect of the impact and the impact on the system. Maybe we can take a lead on re-engagement of the healthcare system and try to weed out the costs and the inefficiencies where it should be. For instance, the gross to net discounts between branded products has never been higher. And all those profits are going to the middlemen, the PBM, right? There's bipartisan efforts now that are starting to focus on that, but neither the innovative manufacturer nor the benefit or the patients benefit from that. And, that has to be, we have to look at the drug supply chain. So there's a lot of different areas where we can be helpful in looking at the solution. And I think that's also going to come down to risk sharing, it's interesting, the healthcare industry is like no other industry, right? If you bought a car and didn't have a warranty, would you buy cars? Yeah. Could you charge as much? I mean, it's kind of like people working on a house right now, the electrician, the plumber, and they all got different blueprints. It just doesn't work. And so there's huge opportunities for us to kind of step up and put our money where our mouth is. I think risk sharing for expensive therapeutics is appropriate. Why should we get paid for things that don't work? Yeah. And we should be rewarded when they do work.
Yeah. You talking about working from different sets of blueprints. I think it was shortly after Biden took office, he announced an initiative that I think the biopharma industry cheered, right? I mean, it was like a positive when Biden came out and he said, we're gonna launch a cancer moonshot, he called it. I mean, it was an emotionally charged initiative, I think in part inspired by his experiences with his son, Bo, who he lost to cancer. And it was billed as, it was sort of held as this, like, pull out all the stops in cancer R&D and enable the pharmaceutical industry and the biopharmaceutical industry with all the tools it needs, with government support, full freight government support to just go after cures for cancer. And now the IRA, which seemingly, I'm not a I'm not a scholar of these initiatives, but seemingly flies in the face of the cancer moonshot. What say you?
It's a great point. There's so many ironies to this, particularly as small molecules are generally more cost effective and facilitate patient compliance as opposed to injectables generally associated with larger molecules. More importantly, patients are really the biggest losers here, as very good medicines may never see the light of day for particularly no good reason. This is also an illustrative example of how government policy undermines government policy.
Yeah.
As you touch on the cancer moonshot, really, its ability to be successful correlates to having the availability of small molecules. You've just cut. I don't know how the math breaks, but let's keep it simple. You've cut the universe of prospective solutions in half. And they're more cost effective. You can get them to market to patients quicker. The time to manufacture is shorter. It's really an example of ill-conceived policy that can remove hope from the patient community without needed change. It is shameful. And, I think that's part of re-educating people. A lot of people will tell you changing this new bill is next to impossible. There's too much vested in it as a general headline. I think the hope is that maybe we can make some inroads on tweaking some stuff. As you touched on earlier, there was a lot of different things and a lot of boxes were checked with this bill.
Yeah.
So, this was definitely a shout out to those who were looking for a black eye at the pharma. But I think there's different ways if you want to approach this. I think this was more punitive than necessarily thoughtful, and will prove to be ineffective at the end of the day. So hopefully, if we can put together the dossier of evidence to speak to this and help to take a higher road, I think that would be my long-winded response to your question.
Yeah. No, it's good. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, I guess, strategic response right now, like in anticipation of more of the machine kind of being rolled out here. What should pharma and you could, it's probably two different answers depending on whether you're leading a small mall company or a biopharmaceutical company. But what should leaders of pharma and biopharma companies be doing to gird themselves, I guess, try to mitigate some of the fallout, or maybe take advantage of any silver linings in the act that they can? I mean, just general thoughts there.
I think it really depends where you sit, right? If you have large molecules, I think your focus is that you need to be focused on which indication you're going to bet on, right? I think now you really got to decide on indications and timing. I think the old days you used to be able to bring a drug to market, in third line setting, and then you can expand it and move it forward. And now people are going to sit on that. There's no benefit to do that. You don't make as much money. It's not the right period. So, that's going to be one fundamental shift, even if you're a large molecule company. If you're a small molecule company, I think you're pregnant if you got things in development, but I think it will potentially influence your programs, who you might even partner with in the future. And again, it depends more emphasis on market size and whether there's an unmet medical needs. So there's a lot of other factors at play. And I think there should be some level of focus on working with the trade groups. There's other avenues that people have been banding together in terms of rallying the industry, in terms of focusing on the messaging and the way to engage with the politicians as well. Power in numbers. We vote these people and we need to make people aware. Again, I think we probably need a new PR agent. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is. I've marveled at that
especially post-pandemic, you know, we went from zero to hero to zero again real quick. Like it was like like a light switch. I'm curious about your thoughts, Allan. You know, you talked about some of the underlying issues in healthcare, specifically in American healthcare, that you think are, you know, probably better addressed in a more meaningful way. I know that's a conversation that could probably fill another hour, but I'm curious about like where your priorities would lie. If you were king of the world and you could say, hey, you know, here's the problem with this act and what we should really be focused on in terms of patient outcomes and healthcare in America. What would the central tenets of the Allan Shaw approach look like?
We could do a whole episode on
that. Well, maybe, yeah. Well, let's do a teaser. Give
Absolutely.
us give us a couple thoughts, and then we'll schedule that episode.
Yeah, I guess I would probably lead off with answering your question with a question, and then I'll lead to where I would take it. I think the IRA, or the Innovation Reduction Act, as I view it, really poses an overarching question, and that is, how do you facilitate optimal, cost-effective patient access to innovative medicines while providing the necessary financial rewards and incentives to keep the prolific scientific engines running?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, and I think and that goes to the way we administer healthcare. And right now, and it goes back to my point about subsidization. And yes, the US subsidized global health. But it's like we subsidize everything else. So why should there be a distinction here? However, the way we administrate it is regressive, because the patients are the ones that are administrating this and paying for it. And therefore we need to, and that becomes the rate limiting factor in terms of equal access and access for all. And that's where I think we have to get back to looking at how we administer healthcare insurance. And from my perspective, it begins and ends with that. I mean, there's a lot more. There's this pharma supply chain and the different fragmented stakeholders that are siloed and focused on profit at the end of the day, as opposed to system value. Yeah. But I think in order to get people marching in order, I think it begins on how we administer healthcare. And today, healthcare is generally administered through employment. And as we know, people on average, and this is also data behind it, generally stay with their employers on average 3 to 5 years. So by definition, healthcare insurers are underwriting acute episodes or acute care. They're not interested in solving for chronic diseases. And this was so much highlighted back when Gilead brought Sovaldi and Hovoni, cures. Yes, cures for hepatitis C, but there was debate who pays for it, because the payers weren't getting a return on their investment. What's the benefit to them to cure somebody of hepatitis C and forego a liver transplant in 20 years? There's no return on their investment. Better to kick the can and let Medicare pay for it when the patient's 65. So, until we fix that, right, there's no focus on outcome. Everything's about focusing on costs. And so to me, the Affordable Care Act, again, no good deed goes unpunished, did foresee the inevitability that you really need to have people in one exchange or one system, because now you can holistically solve for outcomes, and the money that's being saved is accruing to the systems. So, the irony in all of this is a long-standing fringe benefit that all us Americans hold dear to our heart are the antithesis to actually creating favorable outcomes and having alignment for that.
Yeah. Boy, that's a politically sticky place to be. It's like a criticism of Social Security. Criticizing Medicare is boy, that is a sticky place for it's something that I don't think politicians necessarily want to.
Yeah, it's not necessarily Medicare, right? It's the way we, you get your health insurance, I get my health insurance. It's through our employers. And so we need to think about, do we just give people an allowance for healthcare? And again, the Affordable Act kind of provided for that. And then you just get your health insurance and the system benefits. So therefore, decisions are made that are about value to the system, as opposed to managing my P&L.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, like we said, that's probably we'll dig deeper into that in a part two, a follow on where Allan Shaw tackles the problems with the American healthcare system. As far as the IRA is concerned in the near term, any other thoughts on that we haven't covered here? I guess specific points of advice or warning for our audience, biopharma and pharma leaders. Or concluding thoughts, what we haven't touched on?
I think the important thing here is that, that the biopharma has a biopharma risk reward model that shouldn't be done in isolation. And, tinkering with it is like pulling a loose thread on a string. And you have unintended consequences. Without good health, does anything really matter? You got to be careful what you wish for. It's that simple.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your insight as always, Allan. Lots to unpack, and you always bring a lot of thought-provoking and introspective analysis to these things. So I'll always appreciate bringing that to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. And if we dig into any of these other topics, we should probably have a cool, refreshing adult beverage at side and maybe record this at the end of the day as opposed to earlier in the day.
We're definitely gonna do that. Annie, what do you say? You want to get a cooler full of beers for our next recording with Allan?
Yes, please.
Good deal. Well, thanks again, Allan. I'll get in touch with you and we'll talk about what our next victim is going to be. I think we identified probably 3 or 4 topics we could tackle next. So we'll bring that to you and make some decisions here shortly. But in the meantime, that's Portage Biotech CFO and special advisor to many, Allan Shaw. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is The Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community in partnership with Cytiva, who you can learn all about at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Then head over to bioprocessonline.com/BOB, where I invite you to subscribe to a newsletter built exclusively for Business of Biotech listeners. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. We'll drop a fresh episode Monday morning like we always do. And in the meantime, I thank you for listening.